Thank you so much for coming. My name is Yining Ni. I'm a grad student at NYU. I'm also the chair of COSIAC, the Committee on Student Issues and Concerns. So thank you so much for being here. This is the Friday evening panel that we do at the LSA every year. And this year we're going to be talking about mentoring. So I have a lovely panel here who's volunteered to help us think through mentoring. Some general guidelines about what it means to be a good mentor and a mentee as grad students and early faculty. Early career academics. And so I'm going to have each one of our panelists introduce themselves. Just so you know what the format of the night is going to be, we're going to start off with two presentations. The first one on graduate student mentoring, the second one on early career mentoring. And then we're going to break out into a couple of small groups and have probably two round-robin sessions where you're able to be part of smaller discussion groups that'll be focused on particular topics. And each one of our panelists will help lead one of these discussion groups, and they'll tell you what they'll be helping lead in their group. So, Sanjay, would you like to take it away? Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Sanjay Lainhart. I'm a professor and the Breckenridge Endowed Chair in Literature and Humanities at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And I'll be leading a small group on mentoring underrepresented groups.
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Simeon. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in Communication Sciences and Disorders at Northwestern University, and I'll help facilitate the Women and Mentorship Roundtable later today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Kibbe. I'm a graduate student at the University of Kentucky, and I'll be leading a discussion on LGBTQ issues and mentoring.
And finally, my name is Michal Temkin-Martinez. I'm an associate professor at Boise State University, and I'll be talking about advising and advisorship, as well as promotion and tenure. And my presentation is going to be on the early career faculty, so that's how it ties in.
So I'm going to get this party started at 8:48, a late night party at the LSA. So I'll be talking just briefly in broad strokes about what we want to consider when we're talking about graduate student mentoring, both from the graduate student's perspective as a mentor for other students, whether they're undergraduate or graduate students, and as a mentee in their relationship with faculty. So specifically, when we're looking at graduate students as mentors, they could be mentors for two different groups of students, undergraduates and graduates. And those different dynamics between those two groups are diverse and have different requirements on the graduate student. So with undergrads, the graduate student can often be sort of a bridge between, for many first generation college students, right, having no sense of what graduate student life might be, or not really having resources at their disposal from their family about what they should expect from pursuing academia beyond the undergraduate degree. Graduate students in this regard can be incredible resources, and not just incredible resources, but also great sources of inspiration, especially where we see a lot of first-generation students either not complete their first degree or have trouble navigating the application process, or even going through their second degree, either their MA or their PhD. Whereas when grad students are mentoring other graduate students, the dynamic changes a little bit because you're mentoring your peers in a way where it's expected that they will also mentor you. So it's a way of community building where you're building each other up. You're sharing resources. You're helping each other build off, one person's strengths to help mitigate another person's weaknesses. But also it provides a good source of feedback, especially for voicing concerns, whether it's about your research or it's about more personal issues like your relationships with faculty, or issues that involve campus climate. So with graduate students mentoring other graduate students, it's a way of setting up this context of community benefit. So you're creating a system of, you could say a support system, but it's almost a mentoring system where you're helping each other navigate this. Sometimes if it's a new graduate student, the new life of graduate school, or if you're later in your PhD, maybe just helping each other with time management or work and life balance. Now, graduate students as mentees, I think an important thing to consider here is that it can be sort of a gray area. So you're working alongside your own mentors, not quite your colleagues, but not quite your friends either. You still want to maintain a certain level of professionalism, but eventually your mentors will become your colleagues. So in a very unique way, graduate students as mentees represent this sort of transitional phase in the mentorship relationship. And so I think this is important to note, even though we still want to focus on professionalism as the main foundation of that mentoring relationship. And so going off of that, the sense of professionalism, as grad students, we also kind of have to meet halfway with our mentors, right? We can't just expect them to do all the work. In just the same way that grad students mentoring undergrads, we don't want the undergraduate students to think, oh, the graduate students will mentor me if I need it, right? Sometimes, people are like that, but most of the times you want to express a need to be mentored or express certain concerns or certain questions that could indicate to your professors, your mentors, the different faculty members of your department, that you have certain needs and this is the sort of questions that you want answered, or this is the sort of guidance that you need. There's a sort of sense that you have to meet them halfway in this process. If you expect the mentor to do all the work, or if the mentor expects the mentee to do all the work, that relationship's not going to be productive. And so something we've been focusing on at the LSA for probably the past 4 or 5 years now, has been the different effects of representation in academia, especially if many of you might recall last year's panel on the LSA statement on race. We're sort of more critically exploring how issues of representation at different levels of the academy affect students and affect our working environment. And so a lot of the focus tends to focus on representation at the faculty level. But it's also true that when it comes to mentoring, especially where graduate students mentor undergraduate students, representation at the graduate student level is also just as important. Oftentimes this can be as simple as providing, again, a resource for students where the graduate student understands their experiences both as students and as specific members of a community or marginalized group. And that identity and that shared experience is accessible in a way that might not be as accessible from faculty, where you have a greater sense of greater authoritative dynamic between the undergraduate and the faculty member. And so in this sense, even though you don't want to say graduate students have to be the representative for their community, whatever that marginalized community might be, that representation still matters for mentoring at the undergraduate level. At the same time, that representation at the graduate level can open up new dialogues with faculty to explore new options or new programs that could benefit the department or even just the campus community as a whole. I think that's the last one. Yeah, no. So just to sort of summarize the graduate student experience, especially when it comes to mentoring and being a mentee, there's certain things that we like to focus on, and I think there's just some things that we should consider here and later in the Q&A and the discussion that are sort of key towards these relationships that we form in higher academia. So obviously we're going to have discussions about work-life balance and research, mental health, especially when it comes to marginalized communities and graduate student populations that are already, I think, 6 times more at risk for mental health issues, if I remember a statistic from an earlier presentation today. We also, what's also important to consider is the networks and the support systems that we create, not only to combat the issues that we're bringing up in these mentoring relationships, but also to prevent them, right? Or at least to try to mitigate them. And at the same time, mentoring doesn't just happen on the campus. It's not limited to an institution. So mentoring can extend to so organizational work, so like conferences like COSIAC, so there's the Welcome to the LSA or the LSA for Beginners that we have every year that COSIAC helps organize. Program committee. But there's a heavy emphasis on students being introduced to LSA. But it's also, outside the department, outside the campus, even outside the institution, mentoring at the high school level if you're doing volunteer work or different community work. These are all different things and all important things that we should consider when we're looking at graduate students specifically within a mentoring framework. All right, thanks.
So I'm going to be looking at my phone, but I'm not checking my text. Just that's where I wrote my notes. Sort of old school. I'm not going to use the PowerPoint. But I just wanted to get a sense. So I'm going to be talking about early career faculty members, and I wanted to get a sense of where folks are in their careers. So do we have undergrad students here? Yay! Wonderful. Good job. How about first or second year grad students? Okay. How about grad students on the job market? All right. And people everywhere in between. Excellent. Okay, excellent. So we have lots of people in between. So I guess I'll make sure that I keep my remarks brief. But if you want, we can talk one-on-one a little bit more in our round robin. But basically before I talk about how to seek mentoring while you're actually in your career, it's really important to think about for you to know about my own mentoring philosophy, because my advice comes from that place. And my philosophy is that good mentors speak from experience, but they understand that individuals may have experiences that seem similar, but have different circumstances than their own experience, and that then they tailor their advice based on that. So a mentor is not just somebody that went through the same experience as you, but who actually can recognize how you might be experiencing that same experience differently, right? Based on your own personality, your own background, and your own circumstances. Something that's really important that I think a lot of students may take for granted is your mentors right now as students. So both as undergrad and as grad students, your mentors are not limited. That mentorship does not end once you graduate. And I think that's really important. And also, mentorship requires care, right? As a mentee, even, you need to actually take care of that mentorship, that mentoring relationship. And so one of the things that I tell I have to say I only have undergraduate students, myself, but I also mentor a lot of, new faculty, coming to academia. But I tell my undergrads, I will write letters of recommendations, for you until you retire, or until I retire, maybe. But you can't expect me to write those when the only time I hear from you is when you need those letters, right? So I expect my students, that if they want me to continue mentoring them, well, first of all, those letters are not mentoring, right? The letters, come as a result of me talking with them and keeping up conversations with them and knowing how they're doing. And so, I actually continuously update those letters based on their actual experiences. A lot of times, so my students go into master's programs often, and so I will actually help them with their application for their PhD after they've done their master's. And I'll only do that if they actually keep in touch with me and let me know how they're doing, so I can actually write an accurate letter, not a letter that says how they were as an undergrad student, right? That's also important if you're a graduate student. It's also important once you go out into the real world out there, right? It's not really a real world, but once you've graduated and you've started your career, keep your mentors appraised of what you're doing. Tell them the good stuff and the bad. seek their mentorship, seek their advice, and maintain that mentoring relationship. Because those are your first mentors. And now, of course, do this if they're good mentors, right? And if you're in a good mentoring relationship, just like personal relationships, if you're in a bad mentoring relationship, you do not need to stay in it. In fact, I urge you to not stay in it. As far as once you graduate, and this is going to be very abstract to a lot of you, but once you graduate and if you go into jobs in academia, you may be assigned a mentor, but that does not mean that that's the only person that you can seek mentorship from. It's really important, and you can do this also as a graduate student. Mentorship your mentor does not have to be your dissertation chair. It's really wonderful when your head mentor is also your dissertation chair. But if you have a stronger connection with other people in your department, with other people in the field, you can seek out mentorship from other people. And that's the case also when you're in your actual career. So the people that are assigned to you or the people that are your mentors for one thing do not have to be your only mentors and your one mentor for all things. One of the things that's really key to establishing, to having a satisfying mentoring relationship, whether you're the mentor or the mentee, is to really establish what the expectations are very early on. So actually saying, having a conversation at the very beginning of your relationship to say, I'm really struggling with X. I would really like to have your advice on X. Or I really admire the way that you've handled this in your career. And I was wondering if you would mind, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with me. And actually establishing what your need is as a mentee. And as a mentor, what your availability is, right? So if a mentee needs somebody who's going to be really hands-on and you don't have that sort of capacity as a mentor, you have to be really honest with the person who's seeking you out as a mentor. The same thing about if you're seeking out a mentor, you need to be really honest with yourself and with the person that you're seeking out to make sure that they understand what it is that you might need and how to make sure that relationship works really well. And finally, as you mentor, remember, so this is, touching back on Tyler's advice on mentoring undergrads or mentoring other grad students. Remember that you're also giving advice based on your experiences, but that other people may have experienced them differently from you based on their own experiences and their circumstances. And so it's really just key to keep that in mind, right? This person is not me. This person has a lot of other experiences or other circumstances that have caused them to go through the same experience as me in a very different way. How can I best help them? So that's all I have to say about that. I wanted to keep it nice and short so that we have more time for questions. So at this point, we can just open it up. And I think I'd like to open it up for all four of us to answer questions, right? We'll just
play with the mic a little bit.
Yeah. Or why don't we put the mic back on the podium and then, yeah, exactly. Yep. Okay. So you can close your.
The top part. Okay.
Yeah. So this is being videotaped, and so in order to keep the quality of the, I'm saying that off microphone.
Yeah. Okay. So I think for this general Q&A portion, we're gonna have it videotaped, and then after that, we'll have the smaller groups, and then we probably don't need videotaping. Thank you so much. So if you have questions, please go to that mic back there. I'm going to start us off with a question. I think you guys both mentioned this about experiences, right? So what if you suspect that your mentor's experiences are very different from your own? And how do you deal with advice from your mentor when you feel like they don't understand you? So anyone, Sanjay and Catherine are also invited to answer.
Go ahead.
So I think for that question, it's important to keep in mind that there is no such thing as a mentor who's a guru, right? There's not this one person that holds all knowledge, and that is the only person that you have to go to. And I would say that if you are engaged in any way, shape, or form, you will have multiple mentors and multiple sponsors, right? And so when I say sponsors, I mean people who know you and think about you when they see opportunities arise, and they'll recommend you for those opportunities. And then mentors who develop that sort of one-on-one relationship with you. So one way to circumvent this, I have this person who I'm involved with, but they really don't understand my situation is, well, then that's not the person that you go to for whatever that situation is that they're not understanding. You should have somebody else that fills that particular need. So you have a variety of people that you are involved with who fill different aspects of who you are and what it is that you need, right? So if you are, for an example, a student who is from an underrepresented group, whether you're LGBTQ or it's a racial minority, a religious minority, or whatever it is, then you probably should have people who have that set of experiences. If you are someone who's a first gen student, then you want to have somebody who can understand that aspect of who you are. So you have people who represent different aspects of what your identity is and how that interacts with your experience of being in that space as a student. But also in terms of professionally, your particular content areas, right? Or, the particular things that you're interested in, whether you're in theoretical field or an applied field or a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary field, right? You have to have people that sort of think about it sort of as this big wheel. And all of those things that you are, right? You have different people that you can go to, for the particular needs that you have.
Does anyone have any questions or? All right, while you're thinking of some questions, I'll build off what Sanjay just said. So from my personal experience with mentoring, I was a first generation student in the South, queer, in a department that was all straight white people. So when we're looking for mentors and we're looking for mentoring relationships, it's important to keep in mind that we don't have to limit ourselves to our department or even our institution. So sometimes in a situation where there's no one in your department or there's no one in your immediate local area that fits your specific needs for mentoring, it is okay to reach out, whether it's at conferences or through shared interests, or maybe it's just somebody from a different department that you had a class with. It's okay to look for those relationships outside of just your own department.
Would you mind going?
Actually, it's adjustable. Yeah, so thanks very much. One thing that is recurrent in the conversation is that we should, as graduate students and undergraduates, we should seek out. It's okay to have more than one mentor. I wonder why we keep repeating that. Like there seems to be something that makes mentorship an exclusive thing. And I sometimes do feel that, if this is my mentor, then shouldn't he or she be my only mentor? And what is that? Where does that come from?
That's great. Thank you so much for that question. I think you hit the nail on the head, right? We keep on saying this because it's not something that we're told normally. And if you think about your experience as a student, most of your experience is not explicit, right? You just experience it. You're not being told as you're experiencing it what it is, right? And I think that's the case with mentorship. You don't have multiple chairs of your dissertation. You do not get assigned multiple mentors or multiple advisors in your programs. And a lot of times students believe that, that what's implied with that is that you get one shot. You get one advisor, one mentor, because that's what's assigned to you or that's who you picked. And I think the point that we're all making is that, we've all succeeded because we've had multiple mentors and we've had multiple people reach out to us, or we've had the opportunity to reach out to multiple people in different ways, depending on what we needed. and that it's really important that you know that you're not stuck in a relationship, in an advising relationship, for example, if they're not able to mentor you with things outside of, your own research, for example, that there are other people that you can turn to, and that that it's okay for you to expect other people to mentor you, and to request for them to mentor you. It's absolutely okay. And so we want to make that explicit. And I think that's the main point, is that, in academia, that's never made, explicit. But it's implied that you get one. And I think the idea is that it's implied that you need mentors, but you get assigned one, or you get to choose one. But it's important that you actually, and it's okay if you just have one mentor and they're just excellent and they meet all of your needs. That's also okay. I had a fantastic mentor in my graduate studies, and she really did mentor me in everything possible. But I also still had my undergraduate mentor, who is still a presence in my life. She's my academic mother. And I had other mentors that I would seek out for small things, but it wasn't necessarily because my advisor couldn't fill those needs, but rather I saw that somebody was doing something really phenomenal in something that I was interested in, and I thought it would be really wonderful to have a relationship with this person. So I would seek them out for mentoring. Does that make sense? Okay.
Actually, there's something else I wanted to add.
Okay.
And I'm glad you asked that and you picked up on that, because I was just thinking about this, and I do a lot of mentoring. I mentor emerging scholars. I work with undergraduate students. Actually, my research assistant is a former undergraduate student, now a law student who's about to finish, and who does amazing work. But I was just thinking about that in terms of the mentoring that I do, and then the things that I'm involved in. Whether it's looking at, students who are applying for a fellowship, or like the travel grants here, or what have you, and thinking about it, and this is something that repeatedly comes up. So for example, I'm on a travel scholarship committee for LSA, and we get all these applications where we're trying to judge. And one of the things that has come up, not just for that particular situation, but for some other ones that are like it, is who are the students, who are the people that rise to the top? And it's clear that the people who rise to the top are the people who have had multiple mentors, right? The people, because you can see it reflected in the quality of how they've written their application, the knowledge that they represent in the questions that they ask or what they put forward. And then, which is always a conflict, because if we want people to come here, it seems like the people who need the most help might be the ones that we actually bring, because they need that help and they didn't get the things that they needed. So it's not like they're, and sometimes, I've actually had this happen to me several times over the course of 2018, in situations where, somebody who, just fell short, who seemed like they were the ones who needed the most help. And if they just got that help, like maybe they would have been, that top of that. But but that happens through some of the things that Tyler said. For example, the research assistant that I have, and I have had for the last 5 years. Wow, it's been 5 years already. She was a student in my intro to linguistics class, and she was in a position on campus that she didn't like. And her boyfriend, she was like, you always talk about this Dr. Lainhart, like you should go and talk to her and see if you can do something with her. And she came to me, and I was like, sure, I'll give you a try. Why not? Right? You're a great student in class and whatever. And she's been with me for 5 years. She graduated and she's in law school now, right? But she does excellent work. She won a travel grant here, a couple of them that she's won, one from LSA, one from ADS. She's presenting. She does her own research. She presented at international conferences, right? We're sharing a room, which I usually don't like, but that was another issue. But my point is, in her particular case, she took that step and said, I want to do this thing and I'm going to take a chance, right? And sometimes there are students who you as professors will see and you take an interest in them and you're just like, you try to push them, right, to do that. So I think that's that part where Tyler's talking about. There are two sort of things that are involved in that particular dynamic. But it definitely shows if you're applying for the undergraduates in here who may be applying to graduate school, and for the graduate students who are going to be applying for jobs, right? Those or students who are applying for these various applications, that gets reflected. People can tell, right, just from the quality of the way that you present yourself. Because I think that the students who have had multiple mentors and get that multiple feedback in terms of the types of, even the places that they apply to and how they put their materials together and the experiences that they have had, right? Like in the case with the student that I'm working with, this student has multiple publications because we publish together, right? So putting yourself in those situations, whether someone's identified you or you choose to identify some to say, I want you to be one of the people that helps me. Like, I don't know the questions to ask. Help me to understand the questions that I need to ask. I don't know the things that I could apply to or things that I can get involved in. These are things that I'm interested in. Could you tell me what are some opportunities that might be out there? Sometimes you take that initiative and sometimes people will think about you for that initiative because you've developed a relationship with them. But I think those are things that you really should keep in mind as you sort of move forward.
Any other questions?
And I apologize if this is kind of half-baked. I'm trying to put it together in my head. I'm wondering about strategies or best practices for cultivating mentoring, or for finding mentors outside of, say, your program or your university, as was mentioned a little bit before. In my program, I feel comfortable with the relationships that I have, and they arose semi-organically because, they're with classes, and I just reached out for help, and I know who I connect with well. But with people outside of the program and outside of the department, I don't have that connection, or I don't have that, I never bump into them. You know what I mean? So I was wondering about if there are strategies or thoughts you had on how to cultivate those outside of your program.
So I do conceptual metaphor theory, which means that I never have a mentor in my department. So I actually do this quite often. My personal strategy is that attending conferences is the best area outside of your own home institution where you can cultivate those relationships, or at least make the introductions to those relationships. But at the end of the day, most academics are going to be, at the very least, interested in mentoring relationships, especially if there's some sort of shared interest or shared experience. And even though from sort of a linguistic sense, it might seem a bit improper to just out of the blue send a cold email to someone and say, hey, let's be friends. It's a bit improper. But in the situation where you are looking for a mentor and you can't necessarily find that either in your department at your home institution, it's okay to just send an email to a professor, as long as you know what you're talking about, and say, I have an interest in this, or we have a shared experience here. This is what I know, and this is what about you, about your work. This is what I bring to the table. And if you have time to just maybe talk, we could either Skype or discuss your work, or I could come into your office hours. That would be really helpful. And a lot of times, you can have those meetings and it just doesn't work out. And that's natural and that's fine. There's a human element to mentoring. It's not just completely, bureaucratic. But if you don't reach out, they're not going to know unless, you're presenting at a conference and they come up to you. Other than those situations, they're not going to know about you and they're not going to know about your needs. So just reaching out to people and making people aware that you're there and that you have a certain desire for mentorship, goes a long way.
So just to touch on something that Tyler said, going to conferences, you can create those organic bumping into moments, in some sense, right? You can, if they are giving a talk, you can make sure you go to their talk, you stay to the end of the session, you wait for them to be free and pounce. No, do not pounce. He did this, so I said pounce. But, and then you can approach them and say, you know, I really enjoy your work, or I'm really interested in what you're working on, and I was wondering if you'd have any time for coffee during this conference. And at that point, you give them the opportunity to say either, you know, I'm really busy, or sure, I'm free these 15 minutes, we can meet. I've had people do that for me, do that to me at conferences, but also I've done that to others. And I've also done that on campus with others who are in other departments. In my case, I'm really interested in administrative work, and I've actually talked to certain associate deans at my institution who aren't necessarily in my college, and I've asked them at different occasions on campus, like, hey, do you mind if we go to coffee? I want to pick your brain a little bit, right? And having that sort of, you know, opportunity that you create, right? Because you know where they are, you know, if they're giving a talk or whatnot, or if you see that they're in the audience, they're audience members at a talk that you're at, afterwards, just approaching them and saying, you know, seeing if they'd be interested. Introduce yourself, tell them where you're from, and say, you know, that you're interested in what they're doing, and flattery will get you somewhere in that sense. Don't fawn over them, and don't show them that you've Google stalked them, either, right? But you should show interest in their work and in what it is that connects you, to them. Not necessarily your work, because it could be that you're seeking their mentorship based on other experiences as well.
So I support everything that was said, but it's not a chuckle thing. I don't think it should be a chuckle moment. It's one of the things that occurred to me was, everyone's not a good mentor. So some of you may be here because you don't have good mentors, and that's why you're here, because you're looking for how can I find one, right? So the people who, it could even be your dissertation director, is not necessarily the best person. They're not helpful. And so one of the things that I thought about, like, my immediate response is, yes, you go to conferences. I believe in going to conferences. But I think if you have good mentors, those people should be at those conferences, and they should be introducing you to those people, right? That's how I got involved in, you know, I've been reflecting on this because I'm involved in leadership at the American Dialect Society. I started going to the American Dialect Society probably 25 or more years ago. And I started with my dissertation director, who was very involved in it. And he was like, this is where you go. And so I went, and he would introduce me to everybody, and they would go out to dinner, and I would go out to dinner. He would take me out to dinner with them, and he would have me talk to people, and he would say, you should sit by this person, and you need to talk to that person. And I would do that. And I have, you know, gotten more and more involved in that organization, but it was through people who were mentoring me, right? Who were saying, this is what you do. Here is how I connect you, right? Or telling me that I should talk with someone, and saying, then I go to that person and they'll say, oh, I'm so-and-so's student, and they were telling me how you do this work that's related to this thing that I'm doing, and that I really would like to talk with you more about that, right? So that partly makes it more comfortable for them, because you're not pouncing, right, and just saying, oh, I love your work, right? But you've made a connection, right? So they already know somebody, and so they don't think you're creepy or whatever. And they go, oh, okay, you're legitimate because you know this person, or at least whatever. But so part of what I want to say, I guess, is, if you don't have people meeting the needs that you have, then you need to find other people. And you might find those people at a conference, in the same way that you would do if you were an undergraduate student, right? When you want to get involved, right? You look for organizations with people who do similar things to you. So the same thing if you're going to conferences, get involved, or on your campuses, get involved in those things that are connected to the various things that you're interested in and that you are trying to get out of. those things. So being a part of this particular organization might be helpful for you, or being a part of some of the other committees here. If you're a woman, being a part of COSWAL. If you are from an ethnic minority group, being a part of CEDAW. If you are identify as LGBTQ, being a part of the LGBTQ SIG, right? Those are all opportunities for you to get mentoring, to get involved, and to make those connections that you might not otherwise make. And again, that don't have to just be on your campus. They need to be broader, right? Think about that. If you're an undergraduate student and you're going to be applying to grad school, you need more than one letter for someone to write for you. So you should have been establishing relationships with multiple people. And then the same thing for those of you who are graduate students who are applying for fellowships, right? You need more than one person to write a letter for you if you're trying to get money for anything. And the same thing when you go on the job market, and it'll be the same thing when you go up for tenure and promotion. You will always be in a need, in a mode where you have to cultivate these relationships, because people need to know who you are and what your work is. And they don't know your needs necessarily unless you make them known.
All right, let's give a hand to all of our wonderful panelists.